Locomotion. This is self-generated movement. There are two terms that we typically use to describe the moving ability of an organism. It's either motile, meaning it can move, or it's sessile, meaning it's stationary. Trees, plants tend to be stationary. They are sessile. They're rooted to the ground, and most animals are motile. There are some that will secure themselves to rocks like limpets, and they don't go far. So there are some advantages to being motile. You can get your food, you can find a place to live, you can escape an enemy, you can go find a mate. All those reasons are good reasons to be motile. There are disadvantages, though, like the fact that it requires more energy, so there are greater demands for obtaining food. There are two types of skeletons that typically exist in the animal kingdom. You're either going to have exoskeletons or endoskeletons. Easy way to remember this is using the first two letters of the term. Exo, like exit, meaning to be on the outside. All right, exit or exoskeleton is a shell on the outside or skeleton on the outside. An example of this includes insects, lobsters, crabs, most little organisms that crunch when you smush them. They have an exoskeleton, and that's either going to be out of calcium or chitin. We learned about chitin back in the biochemistry unit. And then endoskeletons, which is what most mammals and all the fishes and birds, they all have endoskeletons. They have bone and or cartilage on the inside of their body that grows as the organism grows. Examples like we mentioned. Now, specifically about the human musculoskeletal system, we have a living skeleton made out of bone. 5 major functions include attaching muscles to allow for movement. The skeleton supports the body and gives it our shape. It provides protection, like the skull and the rib cage provide protection for internal organs. The bones also have marrow on the inside of them, and that marrow is responsible for producing red blood cells and white blood cells. And the skeleton is also a storage house for calcium and phosphorus, which is critically important for the function of muscles and nerves. Bones are surround. Oh, before I get there, let me make sure you have the axial and appendicular skeleton. Real simply, the axial skeleton is along the central axis of the body. Anything that is directly connected to the spinal cord or the vertebral column or the skull is part of the axial skeleton. So it includes the cranium, the mandible, which is your jaw, all of the ribs in the sternum, all of the vertebrae, and the sacrum, which is your tailbone, and the ilium, which are your hips. Those are part of the axial skeleton, so right down the center line. The appendicular skeleton, or the appendages, include anything that is part of your arms or legs. So you have the clavicle, the scapula, which is your shoulder blade, humerus, radius, ulna, and bones of the hand, all noted on here for you. And then with the legs, you have the femur, the patella, tib, fib, and all of the bones of the feet. That would be the appendicular skeleton. Each bone has a membrane around it, and that's called the periosteum. The periosteum is also where muscles will bind to the bone so that they can connect to it. It has a series of blood vessels that also connect through it as well. Bone is divided into two varieties. You've got spongy bone and you have compact bone. Spongy bone is porous and light. It is found on the ends of long bones and inside of flat bones like the scapula or the hip. And compact bone is dense and heavy, and it will have haversian canals going through it. Usually it's found on the outer margin of the bone. And I'll switch over to show you on our skeleton what that looks like. This is our real skeleton in the science department. And if we zoom in on the femur here, with the femur being the thigh bone, this ball and socket joint is a great location for us to see the difference between spongy bone and compact bone. You will see right here, there's a section of this bone that has actually chipped, and you can see inside of it, and there are all these tiny little spaces and grooves. This is spongy bone underneath. Now that spongy bone is not soft, but it would normally be filled with marrow, and that marrow would be responsible for producing red blood cells and white blood cells as well as platelets. It's very rigid but very strong, and because it isn't completely solid bone, it's much lighter than the dense compact bone that surrounds it. So the outer areas that you see here, all that would be solid compact bone. It's dense, heavy, and incredibly strong. And you can also see in this particular view all these little holes in the bone. Those holes would be access points for blood vessels and nerves to flow into the bone. Right? So that is the difference between spongy and compact bone. So that brings us back here to haversian canals, which are the cavities within the bone that contain blood vessels and nerves. And then bone marrow, cartilage, and ligaments. These are all parts of the skeletal system that you need to be familiar with. Bone marrow, which I just mentioned, comes in two varieties. Red bone marrow produces red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Easy to remember because of the red coloring. Now, yellow marrow is also pretty easy to remember if you think of yellow being the color of butter or fatty foods. Yellow is fatty storage inside of the bones. So a long bone will have a combination of red and yellow marrow for red blood cell production as well as fatty storage. Cartilage is a structure that is flexible and connective in nature, but it also is protective in nature. The ends of our long bones will have a coating of cartilage to reduce friction. So bone on bone would cause some grinding because it's like mineral on mineral, calcium on calcium. And because your bones have nerves going through them, that would put pressure and cause a lot of discomfort. And cartilage is a nice, flexible, but strong coating that will cover those ends of the bones, and it's nice and smooth. Ligaments are linking tissue to connect bone to bone, and we'll get to those in a little more detail on our next page. So let's talk about the roots of some of these words. In the skeletal system, we see osteo or os a lot. Many of the terms we see have those roots, and there's a whole bunch of them that I listed here that are kind of relevant. Like the term ossification, when cartilage is converted into bone. Ossification is the process of generating bone. That bone is made by a specialized type of cell called an osteocyte. There are two different types of osteocytes. There are osteoblasts and there are osteoclasts. Osteoblast, B for blast, is for building bone, whereas osteoclasts, in comparison, will cut back bone that has been developed. So you can remodel your skeleton over the course of your lifetime by building it with osteoblasts, and then when you get older, your body will begin to remodel and remove excess calcium, and osteoclasts do that. Now, if too much calcium is removed as you get older, you can develop a condition known as osteoporosis. That's a disorder that is a result of loss of calcium. It weakens the bone structure, and it increases your risk of breaking bones. Osteoarthritis is a specific type of arthritis that is a result of the wearing down or damage to the cartilage that would protect the ends of joints. Bone on bone is painful. I've got a couple common areas that are problematic for arthritis. These are the lumbar vertebrae in the lower back, and lots of people have problems with their lumbar vertebrae as they get older because the vertebrae are divided by cartilage pads called intervertebral discs. And these discs wear down, they get compressed, and you can get some connective tissue and wear in here that is a type of arthritis. You can also get arthritis in the bones of the hand. The wrist itself is 8 bones, and there's a lot of tendons and connective tissue that go through the palm of your hand and into your forearm. And because some individuals have developed careers where they need to use their hands quite a bit, whether or not they're construction workers or piano players or musicians, they are highly susceptible to various types of arthritis that can occur, like carpal tunnel syndrome is another condition where you can get some inflammation in the connective tendons and ligaments that are inside of the wrists. So all different examples of wear and tear on the human body. So let's talk about some of those joints. You have immovable joints, which are fused together. Your cranium is actually a whole bunch of different bones that have fused together. Hinge joints are found in the knee, the elbow, and the fingertips, the phalanges. Ball and socket joints are only found in the shoulder and the hip. And pivot joints are found along the axis at your where your head and your spine meet, and you also have a pivot joint on your in your elbow. Here's my friend here again, and this is his forearm. And if I flip over palm up, and then if you watch right here, palm down, the elbow doesn't actually change location at all. It's just this one bone known as the radius, and the radius is on the thumb side. All right, here's the thumb side. I'm trying to show you here, thumb side of my friend. And when my friend turns their hand over, the radius spins. All right, so that is an example of a pivot joint because that radius just pivots in one spot. All right, this elbow is still really only a hinge joint. It doesn't go side to side. In order to have your hand go side to side, you have to move it from the from the shoulder joint up here, which is a ball and socket. I've also included a selection of types of fractures. Fractures are breaks in bones. Not sure how many of you have actually broken a bone, but I encourage you to take a look at these so you can see what types of fractures there really are. There are several. Some of them are worse than others, but we won't spend too much time on it. They include simple compound fractures, transverse fractures, comminuted, oblique, green stick, and spiral fractures. Now let's talk about how we connect those bones to the movement that is created by muscles. So we've got a memory clue here for you. Ligaments link bone to bone. All right, ligaments, that L there, whoops, excuse me, that L for linking bone to bone, they do not apply any forces. Ligaments don't help you move, they keep your bones together. Now, once you've got all the bones connected together, you can put tension on them with tendons. Tendons connect bone to the muscle. So you can pull the bones in a direction that you'd like to go. Now, muscles only pull. They don't have the ability to push. They have to be in opposing pairs. Like, for instance, your bicep and your tricep. One is on the top of your arm, one is on the back of your arm. And so your bicep allows you to flex your arm upwards, and your tricep allows you to extend your arm outwards. They have to be in opposing pairs because muscles only have the ability to pull. You can't push someone with a rope, but you can pull them with a rope. Synovial fluid is found in the joints, and it's a fluid that lubricates the joint to allow the bones to glide over each other with less friction. We also have fat pads and bursa inside of joints that allow for cushioning and a little bit of padding inside for those joints to stay aligned and comfortable. So let's talk about the muscles. The muscular system has several important roles. It includes movement. It includes digestive motion, so the ability to move food through your digestive tract, churn it up, and eliminate wastes. That's all with muscles. Your heart, circulatory system, and your respiratory system are all powered by muscles. Focusing your eye is a really important job of the muscular system. And lastly, I've got body temperature control on here. 85% of your body temperature is generated through muscular movement. So, what are these muscles and how do they work? Well, this is a really complex system here, all connected by a tendon. A muscle is a bundle of repeating piles of muscular cells. So you've got all these bundles of muscular cells, and they're all wrapped in membranes. So the single cell all the way down here, all right, this one fiber right here is a single cell, but it has many nuclei. Muscle cells are, at least skeletal muscle cells, are multinucleated, and that allows them to stretch over longer distances. And inside of them are myofibrils. And these myofibrils are made up of very specific proteins. And it's those proteins that we focus on so we can understand what the what's known as the sliding filament model. So this is the sliding filament. An entire muscle fiber will have hundreds and hundreds of these repeating contraction units, one right after the other, stacked left to right. And one contraction unit is known as a sarcomere. The sarcomere goes from this blue Z disc to the second Z disc, and attached to those Z discs are these thin actin protein filaments. These actin filaments are going to have in between them the green myosin thick filaments. And they're only green in this picture. They're not really green in real life, right? But on the ends of all these little heads or lumps are connecting proteins called myosin heads, and they can grab onto and pull on the actin filaments when you give them ATP. Each ATP allows it to pull like a ratchet, one little click, dragging the Z disc closer and closer together so that you can get the contraction of that muscle fiber. Every muscle fiber, every muscle cell has to have its own nerve connected to it to get it to contract. That way you can fine tune how many muscle fibers are being used to do a particular job. So if you have to lift a 25-pound weight or you just have to lift a pencil, you don't need every single muscle fiber to be active. You only activate the number of muscle fibers necessary. Right? So the sliding filament model allows for the contraction or drawing together of these Z discs to contract the muscle. And you'd have hundreds and hundreds of these lined up together to get a full muscle contraction. That brings me lastly to the three main types of muscles that we have in our body. We have smooth muscle, we have cardiac muscle, and there's skeletal muscle. Now they have different characteristics. Some of them have similarities, so it's going to be important that you really look closely at these and you understand the terms. Smooth muscle is called smooth because it does not have stripes in it. If you look at cardiac and skeletal, which are both referred to as striated, striated means it's going to have all these small little stripes across the fiber. And if you look closely, we can see those lines going across the fibers of cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle. But smooth muscle does not have those. They are spindle shaped, so they're fat in the middle and thin towards the edge. And they tend to be single nucleated, meaning they have one nucleus per cell. They're found in the walls of internal organs. It's involuntary muscle, meaning it does not have the ability to, you can't choose when you contract it. Digestive tissue, like your small and large intestine, your large intestine has lots of smooth muscle because it's got to be able to push poop through your colon. And you've got smooth muscle in your stomach. You have smooth muscle around your arteries and veins. You have smooth muscle around your bladder and other internal organs that need to do some contracting. You have cardiac muscle in only one location alone, and it's your heart. All right, that's why it's called cardiac muscle. Now, it has striations, and it tends to be single nucleated or uninucleated, but it can be binucleated. There can be two nuclei. But the main difference that we see is that it's going to have these branches instead of what skeletal muscle has, which is just layer upon layer of fiber after fiber just stacked together. All right, so these are going to branch. These are going to be single fibers. Cardiac muscle is involuntary. In fact, they've done scientific investigations where they took individual cardiac cells and they will automatically beat on their own. They'll contract rhythmically on their own. They're what we call autorhythmic. So they will continually contract in a regular fashion with no nerves even attached to them. That's not to say your heart doesn't have nerves attached to it. It certainly does. It's much more complicated than that. Skeletal muscle is the third and final variety. It is multinucleated because it has these long fibers, and it's usually attached to skeletal structures. The only exception to that that's coming to mind right now is the diaphragm, which is connected to the rib cage on the outside of it. The diaphragm is located right around the inside edge of your rib cage, and it's attached all the way around, and then in the center it's not connected to anything but cartilage. You have a bunch of tubes that go through here, including your esophagus and digestive tract, right? That would be found in the middle here. Well, there's nothing for that, there's nothing stationary for the muscle to attach to, so it just attaches to cartilage. Okay, that's all we have for the skeletal and muscular systems for this lecture. If you have any questions, I recommend that you contact your teacher. Come see us on Wednesday's office hours, and make sure you're reviewing your materials. Have a great day.